talk about project control. And one of your assignments that you have to do for your career day stall is you have to write up for me how you're going to do project control. Okay? So you will see that we will talk about basically three aspects. The one is control, the other one is monitoring and evaluation, and then the last one is the change control board. Okay? So to put it all together, you need to tell me how are you going to control your project. So obviously, the first thing is that it will be controlled according to the baseline. Right? So when I have marked your last part of your project plan, which is the Gantt charts and the resource loading and so on, that will then be the baseline. Okay? And that is then according to what you will measure your project. So if anything changes after that, you have to follow a formal change control process. Alright? So in your change control plan, you're going to have to tell me how you're going to follow that formal change control process. Alright? And in your final assignment, which is your closeout, you are going to tell me what changes occurred and how did you handle them using your change control board. Alright? Then you also are going to tell me how you are going to monitor and evaluate your project. So how are you going to make sure that you are still on scope, on budget and on time? And then the last thing is you're also going to tell me what control measures you're going to put into place. Okay, so let's look at the so the main outcome of this lecture is you need to know how to apply integrated change control principles to a project. And in order to do that, you need to control the project and you need to monitor and evaluate as well. Okay, so this comes out of the PMBOK, and it basically shows you the different processes in a project. So we've discussed the initiating process in detail because that was when we did the project charter. We have spoken about the planning process in detail because we've done everything that you need to do, the basics that you need to do to plan a project. And now what we are talking about is the executing. Well, we don't really talk too much about the executing process because that is very specific to your specific environment. Okay, so there's a little bit about tests and things like that. But the main thing that we worried about here is the monitoring and controlling processes. Okay, so you will see that your monitoring and controlling starts during initiation because already over there you have to make sure that you're doing the right thing and you're following the right processes. It then also is part of planning, but the main focus of it is during execution. Okay, and that's, well, I want you to tell me in your control plan, how did you do it during initiation and how did you do it during planning? But the main thing is, what are you going to do during execution to make sure that your project is on baseline? All right, and then closing processes is what we will then talk about next week. Right, because next week we're going to close, not next week, the next time I see you. I don't know when it is, but it's sometime. All right, so okay, so the first thing that we then need to talk about is the review process, because we have various phases in our project, all right? So we generate our basic requirements, we have a functional design concept, we design hardware and software, the detailed design of that, if it's a hardware and software project. We then do tests. We then have our manufactured hardware and software, and we have our final hardware and software. Okay? And at the end of each of the phases, we have to review to make sure, have we done this properly? Okay? And each of these reviews then has a different name. So the first one is your preliminary review, and it basically tells you, does the concept fit with the requirements? Okay? Because at the end of your, so here you do your basic requirements. So remember what requirements are. What are requirements? Does a project have requirements?
No.
No, that's the correct answer, no. Who has, or what has requirements? Okay, so the basic requirements phase is where we get all the requirements of all the various stakeholders. So do you remember the cell phone example, where we looked at what are the various requirements that people have of cell phones? And I said I want my coffee machine to be switched on with my cell phone. Remember that? Okay, so that would have been in the basic requirements. But now we do our functional design concept, and that is where we decide which of the requirements are we going to meet and what is the functional design going to look like that will be meeting those requirements. Okay, so if you're not so happy with the cell phone example, when you build a house, you sit down with the architect and you give them your basic requirements. I want 3 bedrooms and I want an ensuite bathroom for the master bedroom and I want light in the house, and you understand, you tell them what the things are that you require, and they then come back with a functional design concept, which is your plans, all right? And sometimes it's difficult to understand the plans because they're 2-dimensional, and this house you're talking about is 3-dimensional. And that's why there are all kinds of fancy software and stuff that you can use to simulate what it will look like, and so on and so forth, okay? And these days you can even measure up your furniture and then go and see where will your furniture fit in the house, and so on and so forth, okay? But that is then your design concept, okay? Then the next step is to do your detailed design of the hardware and software, because now you so if I go to the cell phone example, there you would then say, okay, so what operating system are we going to use on the cell phone? Are we going to go Android? Are we going to go Windows? What is going to be the operating system of the cell phone? Which buttons are going to have which functionality on the cell phone, okay? Which software modules are going to link to the various buttons on the cell phone? What architecture is our software going to have? Do you understand? And you then have to say in detail, when the user goes to the options screen, he or she will have the following options to set. So on my cell phone, for example, I can switch off my network connection, all right? So, and I can switch it to airplane mode. So those are 2 functions that I get on the settings or the options screen, and that will have been decided here during the detailed hardware design. I mean, well, hardware and software design. And during the detailed hardware and software design, they would have decided what the layout of the keyboard will look like. So they decided to use a QWERTY full keyboard over here, and they decided which key will have what symbol. All right. So do you understand? The detailed design is a very important phase. So if we go to our house, that would be where you would decide, okay, we want Italian tiles, and we want gold-plated taps, and we want a thatch roof, and do you understand? So those are the detailed decisions that you have to make about the form, fit, and function of whatever the deliverable of the project is, okay? And so before we then jump into the manufacturing phase where we make the first prototype, and in our house's case, the only prototype, we then have a critical review. So does the detailed design reflect the functional design? So we can't go from functional design and suddenly in the functional design we said that the cell phone would be able to receive and make calls. And now suddenly in the detailed design, the engineers decide, no, you know, that's such a basic functionality, it's no fun. So we're not going to do that. We rather want to work with the fun stuff like switching on the coffee machine. All right. But the decision was already made during the functional design that you will be able to make calls and that you will not switch on the coffee machine. Okay. So So you can't now change from there to there, and especially if it's something complex like the design of a cell phone, you have to very carefully go and check and make sure have all the features that were decided on during the functional design actually been implemented in the detailed design. Right, so now we have done a critical review of the detailed design. We then do tests before we start manufacturing, because you can think that with something like a cell phone, we would build a prototype, we would make sure that all the software modules are working, that the software is communicating with the hardware, etc., etc. And then we manufacture the hardware and the software, all right? So this is not production, this is the first model that we are manufacturing over here. So once we've manufactured that model, we then have to do a functional readiness review. So do manufacturer's items conform to the detailed design? So once again, we cannot now go from the detailed design and start manufacturing and decide, oh, okay, the module to make and receive calls is too expensive when we get to manufacturing, so we're just going to leave it off. Right, because remember, it comes from the basic requirements that we've prioritized, and so this hardware better do what we said it was going to do. And so in order to ensure that, we then do a functional readiness design, okay, to check, is it the same as the detailed design? Then the last check, okay, then we have our final hardware and software, because after this phase over here, we might go back and fix things, okay? So once we have fixed all of those things and we've updated all our drawings and everything is now the same, we now have our final hardware and software. And when it is for something that we are going to manufacture thousands of, we then have to do a product readiness review, because we then have to say, do the production documents conform to the design documents? Okay, so we've now checked from basic requirements right through to the production documents. Is everything in place? Is it understandable? And have we met all the basic requirements that we decided in the beginning that we have to meet with this product? Okay, any questions on the technical review process? Hello, is there anybody out there? Okay, so I assume there are no questions because nobody has asked me anything. All right, but so remember, next time I see you is the redo. So if you've gone through these slides and you still don't understand, you send me an email beforehand and then I will go through it again. All right. Okay, so project control. The important thing to understand is what is the role of the project manager in project control. So it's the responsibility of the project manager to guide the project to meet the performance requirements, the scheduled dates, due dates, and the budgeted expenses. Okay, so it's basically, you can see the iron triangle, time, cost, and scope of performance. That's the responsibility of the project manager. So in order to be able to do this guiding, you have to track the project performance versus your plan, right? So that's why the planning is so important. And so that's why at the end of our planning phase, we need to freeze the plan, but we will talk about that a little bit more in detail. Okay, then because we live in the real world, the actual is never according to the plan. Right? Because remember as well, we spoke about it, our plan is also estimates. Because we don't sometimes know exactly how long something will take or exactly how much something will cost, so we make estimates. So the project manager has to, if our estimates turn out to be wrong, our plan turns out to be wrong, the project manager needs to take corrective action to make sure that we now conform to plan. But sometimes it's not possible to conform to plan. Right? Because sometimes resources are no longer available, sometimes the cost just goes through the roof, sometimes it's impossible to meet the schedule because there's a tsunami or a tornado or it rains a lot. And then in that case, you must make a plan to conform to the new realities. Okay. But remember, any plan that you make to conform to the new realities means a change control process has to be followed. And we'll get to that change control process in a minute. Okay, so this gives you a picture of control. So we have our conception phase, we have our definition phase. So this is basically the main planning phase. And then we have our execution phase. And as we spoke in the very first slide, control is here in the blue, okay? So during initiation and during planning, we need to control as well. But the tightest control and where the project manager has to have a day-to-day pulse on what is happening is during the execution phase. Alright, and then once its execution phase is over, we then hand over to operations or to production, and then our project is finished. Yes, Nelly?
I'd like to know, out of those phases, which phase takes up the most time?
Okay, the execution phase takes up the most time. Yes. Okay, so any questions? Any other questions? Yes?
Doesn't that differ from project to project though, in terms of the project that consumes the most time?
Yes, it can differ from project to project, but generically it normally is that if you draw time and if you draw effort, it looks something like this. Okay, that's according to the PM block. And then here you would have your initiation. Here you would have your planning complete, right? And then this is execution. And that is then close out. So typically, because remember that not everybody who is involved in planning is involved in execution. Normally you have more people, lower level people that do some of the execution. And then when you get to close out, there's a few team members left that now have to wrap up the project. And a lot of these people then go on to other projects. Yeah. So yes, it definitely depends on your environment, exactly what percentage these things are, but according to the PM BOK and according to the current thinking in project management, this is where most of the stuff happens. Does anybody have a PM BOK here? Because if you pass me the PM BOK, I'll quickly just show you on what page that diagram is. Sorry guys in the back, you must tell me you can't see. Because I see, when I stand here, I can see, but I see now this pen has. You can start. So it's in the first or the second chapter here. That's the overlapping. Okay, page 16 of the PM BOK. Basically has that diagram, okay, that shows you where the most effort is expended typically in a project. Can you just pause on that? Right. Alright, so then the other thing that we need to understand is that on any project we have internal control and external control. Because remember that a project is normally done for a specific client. So even if it is a project internal to our organization, we still have a client inside the organization. And normally there is control on both sides. So the client for whom you are delivering the project is controlling it in some manner, and you as the project manager have the responsibility of controlling it. Okay, so the internal control is exercised by the contractor or the performing organization, whereas the external control is exercised by the customer. And the customer normally has the right to audit your books, to books and records that you're keeping. Obviously, there's a contract in place that says to what level they're allowed to do that. But if, for example, you're a defense contractor and you do work for arms school, the conditions that you sign are relatively strenuous, and they can at any time come and audit your books and your hours spent, etc., etc. Okay? Then they have the right to come and inspect the work, to look at completeness, to look at whether it's meeting requirements, etc., etc. They would want periodic reports of cost, schedule, and performance. And also, one of the ways that customers exert exert their control is by giving you an incentive contract. So they will incentivize the contract by saying that if you perform by a certain due date, you will get a bonus. All right. So that is an effective way for the customer to control you, because they're giving you an incentive. Okay, so what incentive have I given you today as the customer or one of the customers for the career day? The chocolate cake. Right. So I have incentivized it, that the group that does the best gets a chocolate cake. All right, and this is done by the customer's own project manager. So you will normally have a project manager in the performing organization, and you will have a project manager in the customer organization. All right. So this is the typical thing that happens. Yes, sometimes when we're busy with smaller projects, there will only be one project manager. All right. But this is the typical way that it will normally work. Thank you, dear. There. Getting my exercise in for the day. It's the only exercise I have time for. Okay. So then the control process, everything starts with a project plan. Okay, and so if you ask me the question, where is the most effort expended as a project manager, and I tell you it's during execution, then you might ask me, but then why do we spend so much time in the course on the planning? Is that something that you've been thinking? Okay, because all the control happens according to the plan, and the better the plan is, the better your project will run. Okay, and so also control is very area specific or discipline specific, but the generic the generic things of control is what we're talking about today. But planning takes a lot of effort in the beginning to get to a baseline according to which you can then track the project. And when that baseline is in place and it's in place properly, controlling the project is not so difficult. It's hard work because you have to keep on top of things, you have to know exactly what's happening, what your team is up to, is everybody following the plan, etc., etc. But the tools and techniques to do that are not difficult, are not rocket science. Okay, and that's why we spend more effort on teaching you how to plan. Because if you've done that properly, then the rest happens easily. Okay, so now we start with a project plan. Then we authorize the work. So normally the work is authorized per work package on the WBS. Okay, so you will tell somebody, do this activity on the WBS. They will then perform or execute that activity. You as project manager will then monitor how are they doing on that activity. How many of the activities have been completed? Were the activities completed on time? Did we overspend on any of the activities? And you will then analyze the performance. And the analysis will then tell you we are ahead of schedule, we're behind schedule, we're over budget, we're under budget. We've done 30% of the scope of the project, but 50% of the time has already run. So that is then the analysis of performance. And then depending on what you find during analyzed performance, you then take action. Okay. So if we are ahead of schedule and below budget, do we need to take any action? Really?
We're ahead of schedule.
We're ahead of schedule and we're under budget. Do we need to take action?
In terms of finances.
Sorry?
In terms of finances.
Yes, so what action do we need to take?
It means there is maybe the most important milestones in the plan were not achieved in terms of certain things that, because you pay for certain milestones. So if you're ahead of schedule and the milestones that pay the most were not paid for, then it means we need to.
Okay, right. So yes, there's always financial implications. Now I said that we're ahead of schedule and we are under budget. So by that I meant that we have been paid on the milestones as we should have been paid. The problem with being ahead of schedule is that means that we will achieve some of the payment milestones earlier. Okay? And some customers don't like it when you achieve payment milestones earlier, especially customers like the government, because they might not have released the funds yet. Okay? So even if you are ahead of schedule, you as the project manager have to take action because you have to communicate it to your stakeholders. And the other thing is, if I'm ahead of schedule, that means that my project is going to be finished earlier. That means that my project team is going to be released earlier. And that means that the organization must line up work for the project team to do. Otherwise, they're going to sit there and do nothing. Okay, so do you see that it doesn't matter what your analysis says, you still have to take action. So if I'm spot on target and I'm spot on budget and spot on schedule, do I need to take action? Sorry?
Saying it's impossible in a project to be like
Okay, we on Planet PMI, okay, because on Planet PMI projects seem to work out, not in the real world. Okay, but even then, I need to report it. Okay, so there's always action that the project manager needs to take. Okay, this thing is now getting cool, so I'm going to now switch it off. We will just do bang control. Okay, so work authorization is basically about this process here of authorizing the work. And remember, no work happens without authorization. And work authorization is basically where you say, do this piece of work to the team member. Because remember, we have a work breakdown structure in the beginning. So just having a work breakdown structure doesn't mean that the team can now go and work on any work package that they feel like. Right. It has to be directed according to your schedule, according to your milestones, according to your plan. Right? So you don't want your team to just start working on activities in a random fashion. Right? And sometimes they will do that. So as the project manager, you have to authorize the work. And then the last thing is, or the other important thing is, you also have to close out an activity. So the person doing the work has to say, this activity is finished. You as the project manager have to agree, yes, this activity is finished. And the client has to agree, yes, this activity is finished. All right. Okay, so with the work authorization, there are various paths that we can follow. So, in a normal organization, top management authorizes the project to begin, then the project manager authorizes the work via work orders. So a work order is just where you say to a resource, you are going to do the following activities that are on our project plan right now. Okay. If you are working in a matrix organization where you are not allowed to, so that would be a weak matrix, where you are not allowed to directly talk to your project team. You have to go through the functional manager. Okay, so you as the project manager give the work order to the functional manager, and the functional manager then gives the work package to the resource to do. Okay, if you are working in a strong matrix or in a projectized organization, the project manager can then give the work package directly to the project team member. Okay. Or the other way which work gets done is work that is contracted out to suppliers. Right, so that can go from the supplier of a ream of paper to the supplier of a nuclear substation. Okay, so do you see that this has various levels of the type of products that can be supplied. Right, and then so this is the authorization, but then the performance has to be tracked, and the information then has to be sent up the command chain. Right. So if it's a functional or a weak matrix organization, any of that tracking, performance tracking information will come via the functional manager. Or if it is a strong matrix or a projectized organization, then the information will come directly from the project team member to the project manager. Right. And then you must never forget that you also are responsible for tracking the performance of your suppliers. Right? Because you have a plan and you want the supplier to deliver on a certain date. And if you don't track that and you don't check, are you still going to deliver on that certain date? It's not going to happen. Right. Okay, so monitoring performance. The project plan specifies the methods and procedures for tracking and assessment. Okay, and this is the part of the project plan that you are going to be writing now when you write about project control. Because you're going to tell me what methods and procedures are you going to use for tracking and assessment. It defines the measures and metrics to be used for terms like review, verify, or assess. So when you tell me how you're going to monitor and control your projects, you're going to say the project plan will be reviewed. We will assess the readiness of the presentation. We will verify that we have all the equipment necessary. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. So those are the words that you will be using. And then monitoring includes status meetings and reviews and are specified in the communication plan. Right? So in your project, it's maybe not necessary that you all get together for a meeting on a regular basis. You can maybe do that via email, right? But all those emails you have to capture and you have to add to your closeout plan, right? Because I need to see how did you monitor and control the project. Okay. Okay, then there's a variety of qualitative and quantitative measures that we use. So your typically more quantitative ways would be invoices and time cards, right? Because the invoice tells me this has been completed and I'm charging you 100,000 Rand for that. Time cards tell me that Unati has spent 30 hours on my project, Precious has spent 40 hours on my project. Do you understand? So it's quantitative, I can measure it. But then managers and supervisors also assess progress by observation, asking questions, and reviewing reports. Because if I planned 30 hours for Unati, okay, let's say I planned 60 hours for Unati to work on my project. The project is 2 weeks long. It's the end of the first week, and Unati tells me she has spent 30 hours. What can I say about that? Can I make any judgments or analyze that information and say where are we in terms of the project? Has everyone gone to sleep? Wake up! What can I say about the project? It's a 2-week long project. There's 60 hours planned on the project for Unati. Unati has spent 30 hours at the end of week 1. What can I say about the progress of the project?
50%.
Okay, but is the so he says 50% progress. Progress in terms of what? Schedule. Okay? Because 50% of the schedule is run and 50% of the hours have been spent. Has 50% of the work been completed? Okay, from the information I gave you, the answer is you're not sure. Okay? So you can see that from the quantitative measures, it looks as if our project is on track. But what if Unati did those 30 hours work, and in that 30 hours, she realized it's going to take another 60 hours to complete the task? Okay? So if I, as the project manager, only look at her time card, and I don't talk to her, and I don't say to her, but how is it going? What have you done? How many hours do you still need? I will be in cloud cuckoo land, and I will think, great, my project is on track. Right? And that's where the qualitative comes in, where you have to observe, you have to ask questions, and you have to review reports. Then a quantitative one is to achieve milestones, because remember that a milestone is something which is spelled out, and it says that the casing design of this cell phone is complete. Right, so it's something that I can go and look at. I can say, are the drawings there? Does it look right? Does it meet the requirements? Tick, 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 tick. All right, so that's a quantitative measure. Then test and demonstration results, that's also quantitative, because in the beginning I would say this product must do this, 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 and this, and tick, 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 it does that. All right, so that evaluation form of your store is the quantitative measure that I'm going to use to measure, is this a good store or not? Okay. Then design reviews. So these will be quantitative as well as qualitative, because the idea is that you have a meeting where everybody involved sits around the table, looks at all the documentation, and decides, is this good enough? Right? So you can see that as a project manager, you need to have emotional intelligence, because in that review, you need to be able to read body language, because people are not necessarily always going to tell you that this is good enough. But you will see from the way that they are reacting as well. And that's where the qualitative stuff comes in. Oh, no, sorry guys. I meant to switch it off, and then because when I say ringer off, then I can't switch it off. So, okay. But I want people to be able to leave messages. Okay, so, okay, and then of course also opinions of outside experts. So if you are building a nuclear power station and you want to know, is this a safe design, you're probably not only going to take the, okay, sorry guys, let me just put this thing on silent. You're probably not only going to take the word of the technical experts inside the organization. You're probably going to get external experts to review it and to tell you, is this plant going to meet safety requirements? Right, and I'm sure that in your environments you all can think of projects where you would have an external expert. I mean, a simple thing like building a house. Do we use external experts? Yes, the municipality. Okay? Because the municipality will look at the plan and they will approve it or disapprove it, and they will come and do inspections on the building. Okay, and that's an example of using an external expert. Right, are we using any external experts on our career day project?
Yes.
Yes, who?
Technical plus the institutions outside.
Yes, because remember I said I was going to get the school teachers or people from the schools to come and evaluate the stalls for me. So those would be external experts. Right? And the kids are beneficiaries, but we're also using them as external experts in a way, because they are also giving us their opinion. Okay, but that's maybe more client satisfaction or beneficiary satisfaction at the end of the day. Okay.
I'm not sure I follow in terms of opinions of of external experts in terms of monitoring performance? I'm not sure.
Okay, so on the career day, I am going to give the teachers a checklist, and I'm going to say to them, go and evaluate the stalls for me. Okay, they're external to the project, but they are experts because they know the kids, because they work with the kids. And so they are going to go from stall to stall, and they're going to tell me, in their opinion, did you guys do a good job?
So is it not the aspect in terms of the core project?
No, because they're external to the project.
Is it not late in the process to get an opinion of
Okay, so if I can go back to my example of the municipality. The municipality is an external expert because you, as the project team, draw up the plan. Between you and the client, you decide what must be in the plan. But the municipality then is an outside person that checks that plan and says, does it meet the building code? Is it acceptable? Can it be built in that area? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Is that during performance or is that during planning?
Well, remember we said that there is monitoring and control during planning as well. So that would be an example of monitoring and control during planning.
So this would happen
But
in every phase of
yes. So remember also when you build a house, when you get to a certain level of the wall, the municipality have to come and check. Okay, so that would be an example of an external expert. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Sorry, I just see there's a there's a grammar mistake, so I just fixed it. Okay, so do not only measure cost and time, which are measures of inputs. Remember the example that we have of Venati having spent 30 hours on the project. That's a measure of how much effort has been input into the project. But that doesn't tell us, is the output acceptable? So we also need to measure the output. Okay, so we also need to say to Unati, okay, how many hours do you still need? How far are you? Will you finish still at the end of next week? Will you only spend another 30 hours? Okay, so you cannot just measure input. So the output addresses the deliverables or results defined for each work package. Okay, so say I've said to Unati, the task that you have on my project is to make 1,000 photocopies. Okay, that one's easy because you can measure it. So I can say to her, you've spent 30 hours on my project. How many photocopies have you made? So now she says, I've made 300 photocopies. So immediately I know that we're going to overrun on this. Because she's only made 300 photocopies, and there's only half the time, or there's only 30 hours left. She spent 30 hours, and there's still 700 photocopies that must be made. Okay, so that's an example of something that's very measurable. But as you know, as project managers, real life is not always that easy. Okay, because often it's a question of how long is a piece of string, and it depends on the difficulty level of the task. If I am doing research into something, and you ask me how much time have I got left, how much time until I get to the end result, I don't know how long is a piece of string. You understand? Whereas if it's like something like building a house, and we know that putting up the walls will take so long, and we have a better idea of how long things take, then it's easier to measure the output. Yes.
How would you fix the cost overruns?
Well, that is what the project manager has to do. So there are various ways of doing that. The first one is to look at, can you save cost further down the line? Okay, so maybe there's a cheaper way of doing something further down the line. Then the second thing is basically seeing whether you can get the client to pay for the change. All right, but sometimes you have to take the punch and you have to pay for the difference. So those are basically the three options that you have in terms of cost overruns. But the first option is always the responsibility of the project manager to try and make it within the budget.
That's why you put in effect to manage some of those things.
Yes, well, it's not called fact, it's called contingency. So when you talk to your clients, never talk about facts. Talk about contingency. And contingency is to cover the risk. Right. And then there's project contingency, which belongs to the project manager. And so that is in your project budget. And then there is management contingency. And management contingency translates into profits if nothing goes wrong. Okay. But you never talk about facts. I know we do, but okay, because the clients don't like words like fat. They always want fat cut out. Just like all of us girls, hey? Okay. Alright, so then there are 5 areas that we need to, hold on, 1, 2, there are 4 areas where we need to emphasize in terms of project control. So scope change control. Okay, so the first thing is, what do we control against?
What? Let's go.
Anything. What do we control our project against? The baseline, all right? So we have a plan, and at a certain phase, we freeze the plan, and that becomes our baseline. Okay. So scope change control, we have to identify where changes have occurred. We have to ensure that the changes are necessary or beneficial. Okay, so we don't make any changes willy-nilly just because I feel like it, just because it's going to be fun to do this work, just because it's exceeding the client's expectations. Remember that meeting expectations is what we are after. We're not after exceeding expectations, because exceeding expectations always costs money. Right, so we're in the business of project management to meet expectations. We must contain or delimit the changes wherever possible. And scope change control is about making sure that we implement changes, but that we only implement changes that have been formally approved. Okay, so any change that we make from the project baseline has to go through a formal change control process. Then quality control is about managing the work to achieve the requirements and specifications. Achieve, not exceed. All right. To take preventative measures to eliminate errors and mistakes, to identify and eliminate sources of errors and mistakes, and to include and it includes technical performance measurements. So is this product performing according to the technical specifications that it has? Right, so the cell phone will have a specification on how loud the microphone must be so that it doesn't cause damage to my ear when I use it. Right, and so one of the technical specifications will be, I don't know how many dB, sorry, I haven't worked in this stuff for so long, but let's say 30 dBs, all right? And so when we do quality control, we test how many dBs are actually coming out of the microphone. And if it's not within the limitations, then there's a problem and we have to fix it. All right. Then the next thing that we control is the schedule. So keep the project on schedule and minimize schedule overruns. Fight the tendency to multitask. Why do we want to fight the tendency to multitask?
Because you tend to lose concentration.
Yes. Okay, and if we lose concentration, what happens to the project due date? It slips. Okay, right. So if you think about it, when I have a task to do, if I sit down and I do the task and I finish the task, I will most likely do it quicker than if I start the task and then Unati says, no, I want you to do this. So then I move to that task and I start that task. Then Precious comes and says, no, I want you to do this. So now I've moved to the third task. Okay, but I still need to finish the first task. So at some stage I go back to the first task. So now I waste time because I say to myself, where was I? What was I busy doing? What have I done? Have you ever experienced that? Okay, and that's what we do to our project resources. We make them jump around, and we don't understand the implication of hour telling them to jump around. Okay. And it starts with the project manager. What, does she make you jump around?
But if you've got multiple projects, then you have to multitask.
No.
If
In the real world, they give you 25 projects to manage and you share one engineer all over this project.
Yeah, but the trick is to try and identify a piece of work that you can sit down and finish. Okay? Or that the resource can sit down and finish. So it's not about multi-projecting, that's fine. It's about multitasking. So if you're making your resources jump from task to task to task, and they have to always come back and say, where was I again? Then you're wasting time. All right. So you should be disciplined, and you should try and give the resource something to do that they can finish in a given time. And until they finish that, you don't give them something else to do.
So then that is honestly, if you do that and wait for them to complete a particular task, then the schedule is not going to be met, because then you're going to wait for them to finish this one before you move into this one.
No, but the thing is, it's about them controlling it. So it's being realistic about setting the task so they can realistically do it in 2 days. Okay. So it's not about saying, here's a task, realistically it'll take a month to do, but I expect you to do it in 2 days. And now I'm going to actually wait a month for it to be finished. Okay, so it's about keeping the pressure on. It's not about taking pressure off. But it's about being realistic about what is the definition of a task. Okay. Then frequently report activity status. So the rule of thumb is that we normally make an activity 40 hours, which is a week. All right, and then we normally have 80 hours is the so 80 hours, which is 2 weeks, and then we normally have a weekly meeting, because that then gives us feedback in the middle of the task and at the end of the task, and then the next task starts. All right, and so you have to set your tasks to meet up with your frequency of reporting. Does that make sense? Okay, so if every task takes a day, then I need to know on a daily basis what's going on. I don't necessarily have to have a meeting every day, but I need an email or whatever every day to know what's happening. All right, and then publicize the consequences of delays and the benefits of early finish. All right, so you as the project manager have to convince your team that if they delay, it's going to be bad for them. Because remember, people always want to know what's in it for me. And that's part of motivating your project team. Okay, and then the last control is procurement control. And for that, we have to monitor the quality, schedule, and cost of procured items. We have to visit and inspect the facilities of the subcontractor and suppliers. Because remember, at the end of the day, the quality of the product is our responsibility. So we can't say, but the supplier delivered something that was substandard. We have to monitor that, and we have to make sure that the supplier is up to standard. And you must track the subcontractors and suppliers' progress and expenses, and prepare contingency for all major procured material, equipment, components, and services. Right. So, in other words, if this supplier is not going to be able to deliver the aluminum that we need for this bridge, and this bridge has to be finished for Madiba's birthday, what are we going to do? And so you have to have a contingency plan. Okay, and then one of the ways that we look at what our project is up to is we have an issues list, or an issues list, or issues log. So every time something goes wrong that needs to be fixed, we say what has gone wrong, and we say who is responsible for fixing it and by when. Right? And if you you plot how many issues you have, right, across the months of the project. If you have a lot of issues that are still, especially serious issues, that are still open after a period of time, then you know that the project is in trouble. Okay. So the idea with issues is you log them, but you also then close them as soon as possible. Make someone responsible, track it, and make sure has that issue been closed. Okay, so controlling changes in the project. This is one of the most important tasks that the project manager has during project execution. So change, what is change? It's any deviation from the project plan, and it happens de facto. So de facto means in the heat of the moment. Okay, so the technical guy is sitting there and he's busy designing the casing of the phone, and he decides, oh, you know what, these black casings are very boring, I'm going to make the casing green, right? And he doesn't check what was the requirement, what was the specification, what did the client want. And so now everything, all the drawings goes through as green, your prototype is green, you understand what I'm saying? And the cost of changing that is high, because you now have to go back and change all the stuff. All right, so de facto changes, okay, so de facto or by discretion. So as I said, the team member now decided that a green phone would be cool. They haven't checked it with anybody, they haven't looked at the requirements. All that happens is 6 months down the line, suddenly there's a green prototype on the table, and very often the project manager only sees it 2 days before the final demonstration to the client, and now you're sitting there with a green face because you have a green phone. Okay, so or with a red face because you have a green phone. And the other thing is that you need to bring it to the attention of your project team that changes tend to increase the project cost and the schedule. All right, because like with the green change, if we have to change it back because of the requirements, it's going to cost us time and money to do that. All right. And it's the role of the project manager to control change and not to let change control the project. Okay, so by this we are not saying that you allow no change, because sometimes you have to allow change, and we look now at when we would have to allow change, but there has to be a formal process according to which changes happen. Okay, so reasons for change, and if I remember correctly, there's basically 5 reasons. So the first one is incomplete requirements. So let's say that the requirement didn't state what color the casing of the phone would be. Okay, so now the team member has checked and it doesn't say, and so the team member decides to go with lime green. All right, but so it was unknowns or omissions in the original plan or requirements, and when the customer sees it, they said, no, I thought it was black. Okay, and then you can have a huge fight about it, but the point is it still is a change on your project and it's going to impact your project. Okay, so the better thing to do is when you have to make that decision to go back and say, okay, it's not in the requirements, let's ask the customer first before we do something that is going to impact and have us have to change things after the fact. It could also be because the user changes their mind because of changing conditions or needs, and the original requirements are no longer what the user wants. All right. Now, for that, normally we can make the user pay for those changes, as long as we can show that the changes have an impact on our cost and our schedule. But remember that if we haven't done due diligence and we haven't documented the changes and we haven't gone through a formal change control process, we cannot make the user pay because we haven't covered it, we haven't written it up. Okay, then there can be insurmountable obstacles. So unavoidable difficulties render the original plan difficult or impossible to follow, or the original requirements are difficult or impossible to achieve. Right, and so in that case, instead of throwing good money after bad, we rather sit back and say, all right, we need to change the plan here. Okay, and you find very often that people will just continue on the old plan and they will just continue throwing money at the problem, but it's impossible for the problem to go away. Okay, a very good example of that is the PBMR. Okay, but anyway, let's not go into that. All right, then pursuit of perfection. The user or designer, so see, it's the user or the designer perceives desirable improvements in the original plan or requirements. Now, if it's the user, as the project manager, you have to manage that, and the way you manage that is by putting a change control through for each change that the user wants, which is nice to have, and making them pay for it, because then they're going to stop their nonsense. But you can see if you give in on the first small change, and you don't follow the formal process, you are eroding your own position and your own authority. All right. And then the other thing is you need to control your project team, your designers, because they like to change things, because it's fun. All right. And that is one of the big challenges of being a project manager, and that's why I'm not a project manager anymore and I'm an academic. No, I'm just joking. But yes, I mean, I was a project manager for 15 years, and I worked with some of the biggest prima donnas in the country, because they work for the CSR, and that means that they're very, very intelligent people, and that means that they like to play, and they like very expensive technical toys to break, right? So to keep them on track and to make sure that they are delivering what the requirements are is very, very difficult. So that's part of the job of a project manager.
Because sometimes they don't even read the specification.
Yes.
The person starts designing
Yes.
without reading the specification.
Yes. Did everybody hear what she said? Sometimes they design without reading the specification. Okay? And it's your responsibility as the project manager to make sure that they've read the specification and to stop them from designing not according to the specification as soon as possible. And how do you do that? By being in touch and knowing what's happening. All right. Okay, then the last reason for change is opportunities. So the user or designer sees benefits not recognized or unavailable when plans or requirements were first established. Right? So once again, the user you manage by making them pay for any changes that they want. But with a designer, yes, these guys are very clever and they sometimes do see benefits. All right, and by changing the design a little bit, there can be a benefit. But you do not just take their word for it. You take it through your change control board so that more than one person takes that decision. Okay, because the designers, well, you know, I can tell you, I can write books about the designers at the CSR and how much of prima donnas they are and how they are always right, and you know, and how many millions it costs on projects, and how, you know, the irony is always the designer normally has maybe 5,000 Rand signing power. For if they need to buy components, they can approve up to 5,000 Rand, and after that it has to go higher up in the organization. But one decision that they make on the design can cost the organization millions. Okay. And that is the role of the project manager, is to control those decisions. And even if the designer has convinced you that there is a benefit, make sure that it's approved higher up in the organization. Because there are other people that have more experience that, you know, everybody must sit together and look at this and say, is there really a benefit? Or is it just at the whim of the designer? Okay, Mickey Mouse says I have 15 minutes left. Okay, yes.
Do we have changes caused by maybe statutory laws in order to meet laws?
Yeah, okay, sorry, that one isn't included, but that could be also a reason for change. You're right. Yes. Yeah. So changes in statutes could lead to cost implications or changes in our project. Yeah. Okay, so what are the effects of the changes? We call uncontrolled changes lead to scope creep. Okay, and somebody once said at a conference, it's not scope creep, it's scope run. Okay, because creep is like slowly. Okay, so the effects of the changes on the project must be assessed. Effects of de facto changes must be reflected in revised work plans, schedules, and budgets. Estimated effects of discretionary requested changes must be assessed before the changes are approved or denied. Okay, so it's always about assessing it and assessing the impact. And if a change has happened without your knowledge or without your control, you must still assess the impact so that you can make changes on the plan if necessary. Okay, so this one says original contract, and this one says change order. Okay, so you can see that if this is what the original contract is, and this is what we delivered at the end of the day, we better have made somebody pay for it. No. You mean telling me that that doesn't happen, Senjo? Okay, so this is the shuttle design. This one over here. And you can see that from 1972, it evolved from this to this. And it's got millions of parts and components. So it's all that stuff. As designs evolve, things are constantly changed. When things keep changing, how do you keep track of the changes and their impacts on everything else? Because a small change, like putting on that little nose cap over there, you see that, changes the whole aerodynamics of the whole system. Okay? And if you don't assess the change of that, your shuttle is going to crash at the end of the day. Okay, so remember the shuttle that did crash, it was because of a, what do you call it, a ring, I want to say U-ring, but that's not the right word. But the shuttle that crashed with, remember they had that big thing about this teacher was going into space and is going to teach students out of space and all of that, and then that shuttle crashed on launch. And it was because there was a substandard U-ring that was installed in the shuttle. And it was because somebody had not done due diligence on the impact of that ring. And they didn't go and they didn't check the quality at the supplier. Right. And so it was $1 million thing. And I mean, even something as simple as a car engine has got many thousands of parts and components. So by changing one screw, what are you doing to the design? So you have to keep track of those changes. Okay, so your change control system. Okay, so there are two parts to this, your change control system and your configuration management. So your change control system is how do you allow or disallow changes on the project. Your configuration system is how do I ensure that everybody is working on the latest version of the documents. Right. Does everybody understand the difference between the two? Okay, so your project plan should include policies and procedures for change control and configuration management. So what are you writing? You are writing a project plan on change control and configuration management for this task that you're busy with now. These policies and procedures are communicated to customers, contractors, suppliers, and everyone in the core project team. Okay, so functions of change control is to continually identify changes as they occur, reveal the consequences of changes, the impacts on the other tasks, project costs, and duration. So when I was working at LIW, which is now part of the NAL, we had a very, very extensive change control procedure. So if somebody wanted to change something on the project plan, on the design, it went through the designers, it went to the production floor, it went to logistics, because I was in the logistics department. I was busy with documentation. I was writing technical documentation for the ROI cut. So if anybody wanted to change something, the logistics manager had to sign it off. And when you sign it off, you don't just sign it blithely. You have to look at what exactly is the change. You have to look at how does it impact my work. So in logistics, for example, where we were writing the documentation, if they changed the layout of a panel, it meant that we had to go and change that in the manual. And that meant that there were certain hours, because sometimes it meant that the people that were drawing, and those days we were still drawing by hand, so it wasn't computerized. So those people that were drawing by hand had to go and do that drawing. It had to be scanned in again, it had to be changed in the document, and the description had to be changed. So you had to go and estimate it's going to take 100 hours to do that. And it's 50 hours for the writer and 50 hours for the draft person. Do you understand? So that is the level to which you have to look at the impacts of changes. You have to analyze alternative courses of action and make acceptance or rejection decisions. So if somebody comes along with a change that is going to be very expensive, you have to tell them, okay, but give me alternatives. Are there cheaper and better ways of doing it? Let him sleep. He wrote a test this morning. And so as the project manager, you need to minimize changes. And the most important thing is changes must be communicated to all concerned. Okay, so I'll give you a very simple example of what happened in my household this week. On Monday morning, okay, I have an old maid that is a new maid. So she used to work for me. She was gone for a year and now she's back. And she used to work 5 days a week. Now she only works 3 days a week. So we've like shuffled the tasks, and so she has certain fixed responsibilities, and some of the things that she did previously I now do. But anyway, so the washing, in the past she used to do washing every day, but on a Wednesday she washes all the beddings and the carpets and the towels and that type of stuff, all right? But now I've realized that and then she doesn't wash any clothes, all right? And now I've realized that there's a problem, because if she does that, then it means we don't have enough clothes to wear. So I said to her on Monday, please, can you wash clothes, can you do our bedding on a Wednesday and my son's bedding on a Friday, but then you also wash clothes. Do you understand? So Wednesday I come home, and my maid is very upset, and she comes to me and she says to me, your husband came and complained because I was using the tumble dryer. And the reason I was using the tumble dryer was because it was late in the afternoon and I didn't have time to wait for the stuff to dry on the line, because you've now asked me to wash clothes as well. So she was very upset because my husband is very quiet. Does everybody understand that word? And so everybody, including my son, is very scared of him. So, so these things have to come through me. So then I go and talk to my husband and I say to him, the maid was upset and I told her she's allowed to use the tumble dryer once every day in order so that she can finish her work. Because my husband is worried about the electricity bill, because I know. Okay, so then I go to my husband and I tell him this, and I say to him, and I told her that she must now do clothes and bedding on a Wednesday. And then he said, but why didn't you tell me that? Because then I wouldn't have said a word. Because I understand if she has to do clothes and bedding, it's going to take her longer. But I thought she was just doing bedding as normal. And normally if she does bedding, she doesn't use the tumble dryer. Okay, so that's a long story. But do you see how important communication is? All right, and these things happen on our projects. That somebody walks into your office and says, can I change this? And you say yes. And you don't think about the fact that there is an impact and there are other people that need to know about the change. Okay. Then you ensure that all changes are implemented and report summaries of all changes and their impact on the project. Okay, and if you have a proper change control process, that will happen. Okay, so here is a change control process. And I've got 5 minutes according to Mickey Mouse. So a change is generated. So a discretionary change is one that you can still decide about. A de facto change, it's happened, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So you want to minimize these ones, all right? Okay, so with a discretionary change, you document the change proposal or request. You then decide, is it a major or a minor change, right? If it's a major change, you go to the formal change control board. If there's a minor change control, it's a review committee or an individual. Okay, so normally it's not a good idea to do it as an individual, because this is your get out of jail free ticket. Because at the time you might think it's a minor change, but it has impacts along the line. Alright, so then there's a formal review. So only if even if it's just the individual reviewing it, it has to be done formally. And formally means it has to be documented. Right. So if it's undecided, there might be further analysis necessary, because there might not be enough information in the change request, so you might send it back and say, no, we cannot make a decision because there isn't enough information. Then you can approve it, or you can also always deny it. So if it's been denied, then it's not allowed to happen. Then you as the project manager have to make sure that they don't sneak it in the back door, because that's often what happens. Alright, so if it's approved, you have to update your system configuration and the project plan, because this tells you what the impact of the change is in terms of schedule, in terms of budget, in terms of scope. So now you take your baseline, you unfreeze it, and you then make the change, and then you freeze it again. So it's like when you freeze your credit card. Has anybody done that? Okay, so some people, when they overspend on their credit cards and they get these huge bills, and they have to pay off these bills, what they then do is they take their credit card and they put it in a bowl of water and they put it in the deep freeze. So now they can still use the credit card, so they haven't cut it up, but they have to be sure that they actually want to use it, because they have to defrost it before they can use it. Alright, and that's typically what we are doing here. We've frozen the baseline, but we can unfreeze it, but it has to be a formal process, because it has to give everybody time to think about, do we really want to spend this money? That's what you do when you unfreeze your credit card. Right. So you then, okay, and if it's de facto, you have to do the same thing. You have to update your plan. Then you implement the changes, you notify the customers and other affected stakeholders, and you monitor the changes. All right. Okay, so change control procedures require that original work requirements and work orders are clearly stated and agreed upon by the responsible people, that you closely monitor the work to ensure it is meeting, not exceeding specifications. Remember, we've spoken about that. And you must be alert for signs of cost or schedule overruns and take quick action to correct problems. Remember, as the project manager, you cannot just put your head in the sand and hope that the problem is going to go away. It's your responsibility to change the things that need to be changed. Okay, so part of the change control procedure is the change control board, and then the freeze date. So the date that you put your credit card in the deep freeze. No, the date where you freeze the baseline. This is where you freeze the projects against all non-essential changes, and the freeze point must be agreed to by management. All right. So when I have marked your final project plan for the career day, I will tell you what changes need to be made, and I will give you a date by when we then freeze the baseline. All right. And then after that, any changes, you have to follow a formal change control process. Okay, and the sooner the project can be frozen, the less changes will adversely affect your project schedule and cost. Because if you look at this very unclear diagram over here, if we only freeze the project over here, you can see that it can have impact on the work that has already been executed. So the ideal is that we want to freeze it as soon as possible, so that we know exactly what the work is that is going to happen, and so that we know that any changes in the work will go through the formal process. Okay, and so this is the Apollo spacecraft, and during the peak design period, 1,000 change orders were processed per week. Okay? So can you imagine the animal behind that to control all of that? Okay, and the Americans, especially because of the space program and things like that, have very, very formal procedures that you have to follow. And they've streamlined it and all of that. Okay. And that's the end for today. And Mickey Mouse says I'm on time. So I hope your Mickey Mouses agree. I actually do have a Mickey Mouse, by the way. Okay, guys, so